The call to the bank took 4 minutes. Constance had known something was wrong before she dialed, had felt it in the particular way she had learned to feel things in the months since Edmund died, the way a person learns to read the quality of silence when the person who used to fill it is gone. She had been trying to pay the pharmacy directly, a simple transfer, the kind she had done hundreds of times from the account she and Edmund had maintained together for 30 years. The transfer had not gone through. She had tried again. Same result. She called the bank. The representative was polite and careful in the way of people delivering information they would prefer not to deliver. He explained that the account access had been restricted pending a trust administration review, that the trustee had filed the appropriate paperwork, that he was very sorry, but he was unable to discuss the specifics of the restriction with her directly. She thanked him and ended the call. She lay in the bed of the room that had been hers and Edmund's for 22 years, the bedroom with the east-facing window, the one she had always kept cracked in the morning, because Edmund had liked the sound of the lake, and she looked at the ceiling and let the information arrange itself in the way information arranges itself when you are 70 years old and have been paying close attention to the world for all of those years. Gregory had done it. Not in a single action. She understood that already before she confirmed it. Over time, piece by piece, the way a man who has learned patience applies it to things he intends to take rather than earn. She called Lily. Lily arrived within the hour the way she always arrived when Constance called, without ceremony, without the performance of concern, simply present in the practical way of a daughter who has learned that her mother needs doing rather than saying. She brought the medications Constance needed and a container of soup from the kitchen and the particular quality of company that does not require the person it is keeping to be anything other than what they are. She also brought, when Constance asked, the old accounting ledger. It was in the study where Edmund had kept it, the brown leather notebook worn at the corners, the pages filled with his precise hand. He had maintained it for 40 years, since before the trust was established, the record of a man who believed that knowing where your money was and where it was going was a form of respect for the work that had produced it. He had told her once in one of the late afternoon conversations she had come to think of as his truest ones, the conversations that happened when the light was going off the lake and there was no agenda and no one watching. He had said, "Constance, if anything ever happens, trust the numbers. They don't know how to lie." She put on her reading glasses. She opened the ledger to the most recent entries. Gregory came at 3 o'clock. He had the particular punctuality of a man who has organized his day around a specific errand and is executing it on schedule. He came into the bedroom with a smile that sat on his face, the way furniture sits in a room. It was not designed for present, but not quite right filling the space without belonging to it. He had a folder under his arm, thick tabbed, the kind prepared by someone who expects the paperwork to do the persuading. He sat in the chair beside the bed, Edmund's chair, the one that had held Edmund through 30 years of bedside conversations, and had taken on the specific quality of things that have been used consistently by the same person, and he set the folder on his knee. He said, "I wanted to bring these to you myself. It seemed like the right thing to do." He said, "We both know Dad was not at his best when he drafted the final will. He was tired. He was not always thinking clearly about what was best for the family going forward. What these documents do is correct, for that they consolidate the estate administration in a way that protects everything he built and keeps it within the family where it belongs." Constance looked at him. He said the lake house is included. It makes sense for it to be part of the consolidated structure rather than, he paused, distributed in ways that Dad might have reconsidered if he'd had more time. He placed the folder on the bed beside her and opened it to the first signature page. He said, "I know you've been having trouble with the accounts. Once this is signed, I can get that resolved immediately. You wouldn't have to worry about the pharmacy or any of the day-to-day expenses. I'd handle all of it." She looked at the folder. She read the first page, then the second. She turned through the tabs the way Edmund had taught her to read documents, not looking for the argument, but looking for the thing the argument was designed to obscure. The language was correct and the formatting was professional, and the intent was visible to anyone who had spent 22 years married to a man who had built something worth protecting. The intent was transfer. Complete, permanent, irrevocable transfer of every asset into Gregory's name, including the lake house Edmund had mentioned to Lily the summer before he died. Not in a legal document, but in the particular way Edmund mentioned things he had decided casually as a statement of fact, as something already true that simply needed the paperwork to agree. "She said I need more time to read this carefully," Gregory said. "Of course. I just want to make sure you understand that Dad wanted—" She said, "I know what Edmund wanted, Gregory." She said it without sharpness, plainly with the specific authority of a woman who had 22 years of close-range knowledge of a man that Gregory had known from a greater distance and a different angle. She closed the folder and placed it on the bed beside her. She looked at Gregory. He met her eyes. His smile remained in place, the furniture smile present but not belonging. Behind it, she saw what was behind it, the calculation of a man assessing whether the conversation had gone the way he needed it to go. He said, "Take all the time you need. I'll check back in a few days." He stood. He straightened his jacket. He left the folder on the bed. When the door closed behind him, Lily, who had been in the corner of the room, in the particular stillness of a woman listening carefully to every word of a conversation she is not part of, came to the bed. She said, "Me." Constance said, "Give me the ledger." She worked through it for 2 hours. Not quickly, carefully, the way Edmund had always worked through numbers from the oldest entry toward the most recent building, the picture in sequence, rather than jumping to the conclusion. She knew what she was looking for because Edmund had told her what to look for in the indirect way. He told her the most important things on the afternoon he said, "Trust the numbers." She found it in the transfers. 18 months of them beginning shortly after Edmund's death, each one small enough to be plausible, as routine trust administration, each one moving money from the trust account to an account number she did not recognize. She added them in the margin the way Edmund had added things he wanted to be certain of carefully twice. $312,000. She set the ledger on the bed beside her. She looked at the lake house photograph on the nightstand, the one from the first summer when Edmund had brought her there and shown her the light on the water in the afternoon, and said, "This is the place I most wanted you to see." She thought about Edmund saying he would leave the lake house to Lily, not in a document in the way he said things he had decided casually and completely as a statement of what was already true. She thought about Gregory's smile and Gregory's folder and Gregory's accounting of what Edmund had wanted. She thought about 18 months of patient, systematic theft from the estate of a man who had trusted his son with the machinery of his legacy. She took off her reading glasses. She set them on the nightstand beside the lake house photograph. Her hands were not trembling. Her mind was very clear. She reached for the phone. She did not call Gregory. She called Morrison. The call to the bank took 4 minutes. Constance had known something was wrong before she dialed, had felt it in the particular way she had learned to feel things in the months since Edmund died, the way a person learns to read the quality of silence when the person who used to fill it is gone. She had been trying to pay the pharmacy directly, a simple transfer, the kind she had done hundreds of times from the account she and Edmund had maintained together for 30 years. The transfer had not gone through. She had tried again. Same result. She called the bank. The representative was polite and careful in the way of people delivering information they would prefer not to deliver. He explained that the account access had been restricted pending a trust administration review, that the trustee had filed the appropriate paperwork, that he was very sorry, but he was unable to discuss the specifics of the restriction with her directly. She thanked him and ended the call. She lay in the bed of the room that had been hers and Edmund's for 22 years, the bedroom with the east-facing window, the one she had always kept cracked in the morning, because Edmund had liked the sound of the lake, and she looked at the ceiling and let the information arrange itself in the way information arranges itself when you are 70 years old and have been paying close attention to the world for all of those years. Gregory had done it. Not in a single action, she understood that already before she confirmed it. Over time, piece by piece, the way a man who has learned patience applies it to things he intends to take rather than earn. She called Lily. Lily arrived within the hour the way she always arrived when Constance called, without ceremony, without the performance of concern, simply present in the practical way of a daughter who has learned that her mother needs doing rather than saying. She brought the medications Constance needed and a container of soup from the kitchen and the particular quality of company that does not require the person it is keeping to be anything other than what they are. She also brought when Constance asked the old accounting ledger. It was in the study where Edmund had kept it, the brown leather notebook worn at the corners, the pages filled with his precise hand. He had maintained it for 40 years, since before the trust was established, the record of a man who believed that knowing where your money was and where it was going was a form of respect for the work that had produced it. He had told her once in one of the late afternoon conversations she had come to think of as his truest ones, the conversations that happened when the light was going off the lake, and there was no agenda and no one watching. He had said, "Constance, if anything ever happens, trust the numbers. They don't know how to lie." She put on her reading glasses. She opened the ledger to the most recent entries. Gregory came at 3 o'clock. He had the particular punctuality of a man who has organized his day around a specific errand and is executing it on schedule. He came into the bedroom with a smile that sat on his face, the way furniture sits in a room. It was not designed for present, but not quite right filling the space without belonging to it. He had a folder under his arm, thick tab, the kind prepared by someone who expects the paperwork to do the persuading. He sat in the chair beside the bed, Edmund's chair, the one that had held Edmund through 30 years of bedside conversations, and had taken on the specific quality of things that have been used consistently by the same person. And he set the folder on his knee. He said, "I wanted to bring these to you myself. It seemed like the right thing to do." He said, "We both know Dad was not at his best when he drafted the final will. He was tired. He was not always thinking clearly about what was best for the family going forward. What these documents do is correct, for that they consolidate the estate administration in a way that protects everything he built and keeps it within the family where it belongs." Constance looked at him. He said the lake house is included. It makes sense for it to be part of the consolidated structure rather than, he paused, distributed in ways that Dad might have reconsidered if he'd had more time. He placed the folder on the bed beside her and opened it to the first signature page. He said, "I know you've been having trouble with the accounts. Once this is signed, I can get that resolved immediately. You wouldn't have to worry about the pharmacy or any of the day-to-day expenses. I'd handle all of it." She looked at the folder. She read the first page, then the second. She turned through the tabs the way Edmund had taught her to read documents, not looking for the argument, but looking for the thing the argument was designed to obscure. The language was correct and the formatting was professional, and the intent was visible to anyone who had spent 22 years married to a man who had built something worth protecting. The intent was transfer. Complete, permanent, irrevocable transfer of every asset into Gregory's name, including the lake house Edmund had mentioned to Lily the summer before he died. Not in a legal document, but in the particular way Edmund mentioned things he had decided casually as a statement of fact, as something already true that simply needed the paperwork to agree. She said, "I need more time to read this carefully." Gregory said, "Of course. I just want to make sure you understand that Dad wanted—" She said, "I know what Edmund wanted, Gregory." She said it without sharpness, plainly with the specific authority of a woman who had 22 years of close-range knowledge of a man that Gregory had known from a greater distance and a different angle. She closed the folder and placed it on the bed beside her. She looked at Gregory. He met her eyes. His smile remained in place, the furniture smile present but not belonging. Behind it, she saw what was behind it, the calculation of a man assessing whether the conversation had gone the way he needed it to go. He said, "Take all the time you need. I'll check back in a few days." He stood. He straightened his jacket. He left the folder on the bed. When the door closed behind him, Lily, who had been in the corner of the room, in the particular stillness of a woman listening carefully to every word of a conversation she is not part of, came to the bed. She said, "Me." Constance said, "Give me the ledger." She worked through it for 2 hours. Not quickly, carefully, the way Edmund had always worked through numbers from the oldest entry toward the most recent building, the picture in sequence rather than jumping to the conclusion. She knew what she was looking for because Edmund had told her what to look for in the indirect way. He told her the most important things on the afternoon he said, "Trust the numbers." She found it in the transfers. 18 months of them beginning shortly after Edmund's death. each one small enough to be plausible, as routine trust administration, each one moving money from the trust account to an account number she did not recognize. She added them in the margin the way Edmund had added things he wanted to be certain of carefully twice. $312,000. She set the ledger on the bed beside her. She looked at the lake house photograph on the nightstand, the one from the first summer when Edmund had brought her there, and shown her the light on the water in the afternoon, and said, "This is the place I most wanted you to see." She thought about Edmund saying he would leave the lake house to Lily, not in a document in the way he said things he had decided casually and completely as a statement of what was already true. She thought about Gregory's smile and Gregory's folder and Gregory's accounting of what Edmund had wanted. She thought about 18 months of patient, systematic theft from the estate of a man who had trusted his son with the machinery of his legacy. She took off her reading glasses. She set them on the nightstand beside the lake house photograph. Her hands were not trembling. Her mind was very clear. She reached for the phone. She did not call Gregory. She called Morrison. She woke at 3 a.m, not from pain. The medication managed the pain well enough most nights. She woke from the particular alertness of a mind that has been working through something while the rest of the body slept, and has arrived in the dark hours at a conclusion it needs the person to acknowledge. She lay on her back and looked at the ceiling. The bedroom was quiet in the way it had been quiet since Edmund died, the specific weighted quiet of a room that used to contain 2 people's breathing and now contained 1. She had learned in the months since to occupy that quiet rather than resist it, to let it be what it was rather than filling it with noise or distraction. She thought about Gregory's folder on the bedside table. She thought about $312,000 moved in careful increments over 18 months. She thought about the guardianship proceedings she had not yet heard about, but understood with the clarity of a woman who has been paying attention for 70 years was coming. Gregory would not wait indefinitely for her signature, and if she would not sign voluntarily, he would find a mechanism to make the signature unnecessary. She thought about Edmund buying the lake house in the 4th year of their marriage, standing at the window that looked out over the water in the afternoon, and saying, "This place is for people who actually love it, Constance. Don't ever let anyone sell it for money." She had said, "I won't." She had not known at the time that she was making a promise she would need to keep in circumstances like these. She knew now. The litigation route was not available to her, not in the time she had. A court proceeding to address Gregory's manipulation of the trust accounts would take more months than she had, more energy than her body could sustain, more exposure to the process that Gregory was already positioning himself to control. She understood this clearly and without self-pity. She was 70 years old and ill, and the legal system moved at a pace she could not match. But she could still sign her name. She could still think clearly, more clearly in fact than she had in years, with the specific focus that comes when a person has stopped worrying about the future and has concentrated entirely on the present. She could still act. She reached for the telephone on the nightstand. Then she stopped. Not Gregory's hours, not a call that could be intercepted or reported. She needed Lily. She waited for morning. Lily came at 7 with coffee and the medications and the particular quietness of a daughter who has been thinking since yesterday and has not finished thinking. "Constance said I need you to call Morrison. Not from this phone. From yours outside the house, and not until you're certain Gregory isn't here." Lily set down the coffee. She said, "Me, what are you?" "Constance said I need you to do it today. This morning if you can. Tell him I need to see him privately. Tell him it's about the lake house and that Gregory cannot know." Lily looked at her. She said, "What are you going to do?" Constance said what Edmund would have done if he'd had time. The call happened at 9:15 from the parking area of the pharmacy where Lily had gone for the prescription refill. She stood between 2 cars and called Morrison's direct line, the one she had been given years ago, for exactly the kind of situation that required directness rather than the office protocol. Morrison answered on the 3rd ring. Lily explained in the efficient, compressed way of a woman who understood that the important information needed to arrive before anything else. Her mother was ill. Her mother's accounts had been frozen by Gregory. Gregory had presented documents for her mother to sign that would transfer the lake house, and her mother had found evidence in Edmund's ledger of significant financial manipulation over the past 18 months. Morrison listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "Is she clear? Cognitively, is your mother thinking clearly?" Lily said, "More clearly than I am right now." He said, "I'll come Wednesday. Tell her not to sign anything before then and not to give Gregory any indication that she's spoken with me." The call from Gregory came that afternoon, not to Constance directly to the house line, which Lily answered and then carried to her mother's room with the expression of a woman delivering information she would prefer not to deliver. Gregory's voice through the phone had the specific quality of a man reporting a settled matter rather than opening a conversation. He said, "I wanted you to be aware that I've spoken with my attorney about the guardianship option. Given the concerns about your capacity to manage the trust affairs, it seemed prudent to at least explore the protective mechanism. The petition would go to the county court, standard procedure for someone in your situation." He said situation with the careful neutrality of someone who has chosen the word to be maximally difficult to object to. He said, "It's purely protective, Constance. Nobody wants to make this difficult." She said, "I understand, Gregory." She ended the call. She sat for a moment with the phone in her lap. A guardianship petition. Once filed, it would move quickly. Courts did not delay these proceedings when a family member was pressing for them. 2 weeks, perhaps less. After which, if Gregory succeeded, her legal capacity to act independently would be in question, and any document she signed could be challenged on the grounds of the proceeding itself. 12 days, perhaps 14. She had signed documents under more difficult circumstances. Lily found her at the window. She had moved from the bed to the chair by the east window, the one that looked out over the garden toward the lake, the view she had been looking at for 22 years, of mornings and evenings and everything in between. The afternoon light was doing what it did at this time of year, going low and amber across the water. Lily stood in the doorway. She said, "Me. I was in the kitchen when Diana called Gregory. I heard what she said." Constance turned from the window. Lily's face had the particular pallor of someone who has heard something that confirmed a fear she had been managing by not articulating it. She said, "Diana said once the guardianship order is in place, they control everything." She said she stopped. She said that includes the lake house. Constance looked at her daughter. Lily said, "Me, what do we do?" Constance held out her hand. Lily crossed the room and took it. Constance said quietly in the voice she used for things that mattered and needed to be said precisely, "Don't tell Gregory anything. Don't let him see that you've heard anything. Just help me see Morrison." She held her daughter's hand. She said Edmund wanted Lily to have the lake house. He told me that the summer before he died. He said it in the way he said things he had already decided, not as a plan, just as a fact. She said he didn't have time to put it in writing. "I do." She looked at the window, at the amber light on the water. She said, "I have 12 days. That's enough." Outside, the lake held its afternoon light in the way it always held it steady, unhurried entirely itself. The light Edmund had wanted her to see on the first afternoon he brought her here, standing at this same window saying, "This is the place I most wanted to show you." She was going to make sure it went to someone who would stand at that window and understand why. She squeezed Lily's hand. She reached for the phone. Wednesday arrived with the particular quality of days that have been prepared for not with drama, not with announcement, but with the specific clarity of a morning that knows what it is for. Constance had slept better than she expected. She had lain down the night before with the particular peace of a person who has made a decision and is no longer in the process of making it, and had woken at 7 to the sound of the lake through the cracked window and the November light coming in at its low, honest angle, and had thought today. She asked Lily to help her wash her hair, not because it mattered for the signing Morrison would not care about her hair, but because Edmund had always said she was most herself when she had washed her hair and put on the blue cardigan, and she wanted to be most herself today. She wanted whoever read the notary's notation about the signer's appearance and demeanor to find a woman who looked like what she was clear present, entirely intentional. Lily helped her without asking why. That was one of the things Constance had always loved most about her daughter. Gregory left for the courthouse at 11. He had told Constance the previous evening, with the particular transparency of a man who wants to be seen as organized and considerate, that he had a procedural hearing regarding the guardianship petition in the morning and would be back by 4. He had said it as information. She had received it as a window. She told Lily call Morrison and confirmed 2 o'clock. He arrived at 1:55. He came through the side door that Lily had left unlocked with his briefcase and his reading glasses, and the unhurried manner of a man who has been doing this work for 40 years and has learned that the most important thing you can bring to a signing of this kind is steadiness, not urgency, not efficiency, steadiness. The quality that communicates to a person who is ill and uncertain and signing something irrevocable that they are in the presence of someone who has done this before and knows how it should go. The nurse Patricia, who had been Constance's primary care nurse for 6 weeks and who had been asked 3 days ago with the directness Constance brought to requests that mattered whether she would serve as a witness to a legal document signing if needed, was already in the room. She stood near the window with the composed neutrality of a professional who has been told enough to understand the importance of what she is doing, and not so much that she would be required to testify about the details of the conversation. Lily stood at the door. Morrison set his briefcase on the chair beside the bed and opened it. He removed the document, the inter vivos gift deed, properly drafted the legal description of the lake house property, running through the first page and into the second, the operative language of the conveyance clear and specific, in the way that Morrison's documents were always clear and specific, and he placed it on the overbed table. He adjusted the angle so she could read it without straining. He said, "Take the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." Constance read it, not quickly, line by line, the way Edmund had taught her to read anything with legal weight, the way she had been reading documents since the first years of their marriage, when she had understood that understanding what you were signing was a form of respect for yourself and the person across the table. She read the property description and confirmed it matched the address she knew. She read the grantor and grantee lines. She read the gift language, the formal statement that this was a transfer for love and affection without consideration, freely and voluntarily made. She found a small error on the second page. The street address was missing, the unit designation, a detail that would not affect the legal validity, but that Constance wanted corrected because Edmund had always said that small errors in documents invited larger arguments. She pointed it out. Morrison made the correction in the margin initialed. It asked her to initial beside his initial. She did. She asked 3 questions. The first, whether the deed once recorded could be challenged on the basis of her illness. Morrison said, "The deed is executed while you have full legal capacity. Your illness does not affect your capacity to make a gift." Gregory could attempt a challenge on undue influence grounds claiming Lily pressured you, but the circumstances of this signing, the witnesses present, and what I understand you intend to record, make that challenge very difficult to sustain. The second, whether the recording would happen before any guardianship order could take effect. Morrison said, "I will file for recording today before close of business. A guardianship order, even if granted, cannot retroactively void a valid deed executed before the order was in place. The timing is in our favor." The third, whether Edmund's stated intention, his verbal statement that the lake house should go to Lily, had any legal weight. Morrison said it has no legal weight on its own, but it has considerable moral weight, and in any proceeding where the question is whether this deed reflects a reasonable expression of your wishes, the fact that it aligns with what Edmund said publicly and privately will matter. She sat with that for a moment. Then she reached for the drawer of the nightstand. The pen was where she had kept it for 25 years, in the small tray at the front of the drawer, beside the reading glasses, and the photograph of Edmund at the lake house in the summer they bought it. The pen Edmund had given her on their 25th anniversary, the white pearl handle worn smooth at the grip from years of use, the nib still precise and reliable in the way of things made to last. He had said, placing it in her hand, "This is for the most important things, Constance. Don't waste it." She had signed their mortgage renewal with it, their children's legal documents, the papers when Edmund's mother's estate was settled. 25 years of the things that required her name and deserved the best instrument she owned. She had been saving it for this without knowing she was saving it. She picked it up. She looked at the deed on the table. She said Edmund wanted Lily to have the lake house. He said it the summer before he died, not in a document, just in the way he said things he had decided. As a fact, he didn't have time to put it in writing. I'm finishing what he started. Morrison did not respond. He did not need to respond. He simply held the table steady and waited. She signed. The pen moved with the steadiness she had felt since 3 a.m, on the night she decided, the steadiness that was not the absence of feeling, but something underneath, feeling the bedrock beneath it, the part that remained clear and certain even when everything else was uncertain. She signed her full name, Constance Eleanor Whitfield, the signature she had used for 70 years on everything that mattered. The nurse stepped forward and signed as witness. Morrison signed as the supervising attorney. He folded the document with the careful precision of a man handling something he intends to deliver intact. He placed it in the red envelope, the one he had brought specifically for this, sealed, with wax at the flap, the kind of closure that communicated this has been received and is being held with intention. He placed the envelope in his briefcase and closed it. He looked at Constance. He said, I'll file today. It will be recorded by tomorrow morning. She said, thank you, Cecil. He said Edmund chose his friends well. He picked up his briefcase and nodded to Lily and to Patricia and walked out. Lily came to the bed. She sat in the chair beside it, Edmund's chair, the one she had been sitting in since she arrived, the one that had held Edmund through 30 years of bedside conversations and had become through that use the specific shape of a chair that knows what sitting beside someone means. She did not speak. Constance put her hand over Lily's. She looked at the window. The afternoon light was going the way it went in November, the amber that arrived in the last hour before dark, the light that found the surface of the lake and held it for a few minutes in a way that made the water look like something that had been placed there deliberately for the specific purpose of being beautiful. Edmund had shown her this light the first afternoon he brought her to the lake house. He had stood beside her at the window and said, "This is the thing I most wanted you to see." She understood looking at it now that what he had meant was not the light. What he had meant was the specific feeling of standing beside someone you trust in front of something beautiful and knowing that they see it the same way you do. She smiled. Not because the fight was won, that would be someone else's job to finish Morrison's and Lily's and the county recorder's and whatever legal proceedings followed, but because she had done what needed doing. She had completed what Edmund had not had time to complete. She had held the pen he had given her for exactly this and had used it for exactly this and had done it clearly, steadily, with full knowledge of what she was doing and why. She said to Lily, to the room, to the amber light on the water, "I'm done." She did not mean finished. She meant complete. The will reading was scheduled for 2:00 on a Thursday afternoon. Gregory had arranged the venue himself, the conference room of Hargrove and Stanton, the firm he had retained 8 months before Edmund's death, with the particular forethought of a man who had been planning the administration of an estate before the estate's owner had finished living. The room had the polished, neutral quality of a space designed for serious financial transactions. The long table, the leather chairs, the credenza, with the water service, the window that looked out over the downtown street with its implication of permanent institutions and settled money. Gregory and Diana arrived at 1:45. They sat in the front row of chairs, the ones closest to the table where the documents would be read, and they arranged themselves with the ease of people who have been waiting for a long time for a specific moment and have finally arrived at it. Diana had a new jacket. Gregory had a new suit, the kind purchased to mark an occasion the buyer expects to remember. Lily sat behind them and to the left. She had dressed quietly, the dark blue that was her color for occasions that required dignity rather than presentation. She had her hands in her lap and her face composed into the particular stillness of someone who has agreed to be present for something difficult and is keeping the agreement. She had not told Gregory about Morrison. She had not told Gregory about the deed. She had not told Gregory about the video. She had been carrying all three since her mother died in the specific way you carry things that are not yet ready to be used, carefully, privately waiting. The reading took 40 minutes. Edmund's estate was substantial, and the distribution was detailed, and Gregory's attorney, a man named Stanton, who had the comfortable authority of someone operating entirely on home ground, read it with the measured pace of a professional who understands that the audience needs time to absorb each item before the next one arrives. The primary residence to Gregory. The investment accounts divided between Gregory and a charitable foundation Edmund had established with Gregory controlling the foundation's board. The personal property to Gregory with specific items designated for family members at Gregory's discretion. At Gregory's discretion. Lily's name appeared once in the document in a section that allocated a specific sum, $40,000, described as recognition of her relationship with the decedent, a number that communicated with the particular cruelty of legal language exactly what Gregory had arranged for Edmund's relationship with Lily to be worth. When the lake house was named, Gregory allowed himself a small expression, not a full smile, something more controlled, the slight easing of a man confirming what he expected to confirm. The lake house was listed under the primary real estate distribution passing to Gregory as part of the consolidated estate to be administered at his discretion as part of the family holdings. Stanton reached the final page. He said that concludes the primary distribution. If there are no... The door opened. Morrison entered without hurry. He was 65 years old and had been practicing estate law for 38 of those years, and he moved through rooms where legal proceedings were happening with the specific quality of a man who has been in enough of them to understand that the most authoritative thing he can do is simply arrive without performing his arrival. He carried his black briefcase. He crossed the room and took the empty chair at the far end of the conference table, the chair that had not been reserved for anyone that had not been part of Gregory's arrangement of the room that existed in the conference room's natural supply of chairs and was now occupied. He set the briefcase on the table. Gregory turned. The expression that moved through his face in the 3 seconds after he saw Morrison was not a single emotion, but a sequence recognition confusion, the rapid recalibration of a man who has planned for specific contingencies and is encountering one he did not include. He said, "You don't have standing here, Morrison. My father replaced you 2 years ago. You have no role in this estate proceeding." Morrison opened his briefcase. He said, "You're correct that I don't represent Edmund. I never have for the past 2 years." He said it without heat as a factual clarification. He said, "I'm not here in connection with Edmund's estate." He placed the red envelope on the table. The wax seal was intact, the dark red of it visible from every seat in the room, the impression of the seal clear and deliberate. The kind of closure that communicates this was placed here by someone who intended it to last until the right moment. He said, "I'm here as representative of Constance Eleanor Whitfield, who was my client for 22 years, who retained me privately 8 weeks before her death for a specific purpose, and who asked me to appear at the reading of Edmund's will to ensure that a document she executed was properly entered into the record." He said, "Before we conclude this proceeding, I have a document that requires acknowledgement." Stanton looked at the envelope. He had the specific expression of a legal professional encountering something unexpected and assessing its implications before responding, not alarmed precisely, but alert in the way of someone whose professional obligations have just expanded in a direction he had not anticipated. He said, "What is the nature of the document?" Morrison said, "An inter vivos gift deed, executed by Constance Whitfield 22 days before her death, properly witnessed, notarized, and recorded with the county recorder's office, transferring the lake house property to Lily Ann Whitfield." He opened the envelope. The seal released with the specific sound of wax that has done its job, the small, clean separation of something that is held and is now releasing because the time for holding has ended and the time for showing has arrived. He placed the deed on the table. The notary, who had been seated at the side of the room, present for exactly this purpose, the procedural confirmation of documents presented at will readings, looked at it. She reviewed the recording stamp. She checked the instrument number. She looked at the date of execution and the date of recording. She nodded. She said, "This is a valid recorded instrument, executed and filed prior to any guardianship order." Gregory said she was not competent. She was ill. She was being influenced by... He said it with the rising pressure of a man deploying an argument he has prepared and finding in the deployment that the preparation may not have been sufficient. Morrison reached into his briefcase a second time. He placed a small USB drive on the table beside the deed. He said Constance anticipated this objection, specifically and explicitly. 3 weeks before her death on the same afternoon she executed the deed, she recorded a video statement. In it, she speaks directly to camera, identifies herself by full name, states the date, states her purpose in executing the deed, and addresses the specific question of her competency. He said she was, and I want to be precise about this, entirely clear. More clear in my 38 years of practice than most clients I have encountered in the execution of documents of this kind. She had questions. She corrected an error in the address. She asked about the legal implications of the timing relative to the guardianship proceeding. These are not the questions of a woman who does not understand what she is signing. He said the video is available for viewing. I would recommend that before any challenge to this deed is filed, everyone in this room sees it. Gregory was standing. His face had the color of a man whose blood has done something involuntary, the red of anger that is also underneath the red of a man who has heard something that changes the shape of everything and has not yet found the new shape. He said Lily put her up to this. Lily has been... Morrison said Lily did not know the deed existed until I informed her of it after Constance's death. I can provide documentation of the timeline of Lily's knowledge if it becomes relevant to any proceeding. He said it the way he said everything, not arguing, not advocating, presenting. The way a man presents facts that are sufficient without amplification. Diana had placed her hand on Gregory's arm, not in the gesture of comfort, in the gesture of a woman who understands that her husband is about to say something that will make things worse and is attempting with a grip to prevent it. Stanton looked at Gregory, then at the deed, then at Morrison. He said, I'll need to note the existence of this instrument in the estate record and advise my client on its implications before we proceed. Morrison said, Of course. He closed his briefcase. He looked briefly at Lily. She had been sitting in her chair since he entered the room with the specific stillness of someone who has been waiting for something and has arrived at the moment of its arrival. Her hands were in her lap. Her face was composed in the way Constance's face had been composed, not without feeling, but with feeling held in its proper place beneath the surface, doing what it needed to do without being performed. She looked at the deed on the table. Her name in the grantee line, Constance Eleanor Whitfield as grantor, the lake house address, the date 22 days before her mother died. Edmund had promised this. Constance had completed it. Morrison had carried it here. 3 people across a span of time doing the work of a single intention. Lily sat in her chair and looked at the deed and did not speak. She did not need to speak. Her mother had already said everything. Morrison inserted the drive into the port on the conference room's display screen. The screen had been used until this moment for the projection of estate documents, the clinical columns of asset distribution, the formal language of a will being administered according to a plan Gregory had spent 18 months constructing. The room had been arranged for that purpose. The chairs faced the screen with the orientation of an audience that has come to receive information rather than be surprised by it. What appeared on the screen now was not a document. It was a woman. Constance Eleanor Whitfield, sitting in the chair by the east window of the bedroom she had shared with Edmund for 22 years. The window behind her showed the November light on the lake, the amber of it, the specific low angle of late afternoon. In that season, the light that Edmund had shown her the first afternoon, he brought her to the lake house, and that she had been looking at ever since. She was wearing the blue cardigan. Her silver hair was combed back. Her hands were folded in her lap, and they were still. She looked directly into the camera with the expression of a person who has something specific to say and has decided to say it without preamble. She said, My name is Constance Eleanor Whitfield. Today as she gave the date clearly without hesitation, and I am making this recording in my bedroom at the family home in the presence of my nurse, Patricia, and attorney Cecil Morrison. I am recording this because I understand that my stepson Gregory intends to challenge the inter vivos gift deed. I signed earlier this afternoon, and I want there to be no question about my state of mind or my intentions. The room was quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when everyone present has simultaneously decided to stop what they were doing. Gregory was at the far end of the table. His posture, which had been the posture of a man engaged in an argument he intended to win, had changed. He was still, the particular stillness of a person encountering something he did not prepare for. Constance continued. She said, "I am 70 years old and I am ill. I know what those two facts invite people to assume. I want to address those assumptions directly. I am not confused. I am not being pressured. I am not being managed by my daughter or by anyone else. Lily did not ask me to sign this deed. She did not know I was signing it until after I had already done so. The decision was mine, made alone in full clarity for reasons I am about to explain. She said Edmund told me the summer before he died that he wanted Lily to have the lake house. He said it in the way Edmund said things he had decided as a statement of fact, not a plan. He said that house should go to Lily. She loves it the way I love it. He didn't have time to update his will. I had time. I used it." She paused. She unfolded her hands and picked up something from the table beside her, the brown leather ledger Edmund's accounting book, the one Constance had read through on the night she found the transfers. She said, "I also want to address what I found in Edmund's records. In the 18 months following Edmund's death, a total of $312,000 was transferred from the family trust account to an account I do not recognize and was not informed about. I am going to read the specific entries." She read them, date by date, amount by amount, in the precise and unhurried manner of a woman who has always understood that numbers are the language that does not permit interpretation. She read them the way Edmund had read them, clearly in sequence, without editorial comment, letting the figures speak, as figures speak without ambiguity. The room was very still. Diana had lowered her head. Not gradually at a specific point in Constance's reading of the figures, she had looked down at the table surface and not looked up again. The particular posture of someone who has heard what they were afraid of hearing and has decided that the table is a better place to direct their attention than the screen. Gregory's attorney, the man named Stanton, who had been reading Edmund's will with such measured authority 20 minutes ago, was looking at his own notepad. He was writing something. The writing of a man taking notes that are for his own legal protection rather than his client's benefit. Constance set the ledger down. She said, "I did not sign this deed in anger. I signed it because it was the right thing to do. Edmund loved Lily as a daughter. He told me so not once, but many times in the way he told me things that were simply true. Gregory knows this. He has always known this. The decision he made to position himself to receive everything, including the lake house, including the property his father specifically said should go elsewhere, was a decision made in full knowledge of what Edmund wanted." She looked directly into the camera. She said, "I am not afraid. I want Lily to know that. I have not been afraid of any of this. I am only interested in making sure the right thing is done. Edmund deserved better than what is happening to his estate. Lily deserves better, and I had enough time left to do something about it. So I did." She said, "This is my final act as Edmund's wife. I am proud of it." The video ended. The screen went to black. The conference room held the specific silence of a space in which something large has just moved through it, and the people present are still feeling the displacement of the air. Gregory stood up. He said, "That video was made under duress. Lily was in the house. She had been managing my stepmother's care for weeks. The influence was—" He reached toward the screen. "Morrison said the copies were filed with the county clerk's office and transmitted to the state attorney's office before I arrived here this morning. What you are looking at is a display copy. There is nothing in this room that you could remove or damage that would affect the record." He said it without raising his voice. Gregory's hand stopped. His attorney stood. He leaned toward Gregory and said something in the specific low register of a professional delivering assessment rather than advice, something brief, something that required Gregory to absorb it and respond. Gregory absorbed it. He did not respond with words. He sat back down. Stanton said to the room, "I'll need to advise my client before this proceeding continues." Morrison said, "Of course." He looked at Lily. She had been sitting in her chair throughout the video, with the stillness she had brought into the room, not the stillness of someone managing their reaction, but the stillness of someone fully present in a moment that is exactly what it is. When Constance had said, "Lily, I want you to know I was not afraid," Lily's hands had moved to the edge of the table and held it the way you hold something when you need to be connected to a solid surface. Now her face was wet, not performing grief, simply having it in the plain way of someone for whom the feeling is too complete to be contained in any posture or expression that might seem chosen. Morrison reached into his briefcase. He took out the deed, the original, the one that had been in the red envelope since the afternoon Constance signed it, and set down the pearl-handled pen and looked out the window at the light on the lake. He placed it in Lily's hands. He said, "The lake house is yours, as your mother intended, as Edmund intended before her." Lily looked at the deed, at her name in the grantee line, at Constance Eleanor Whitfield as grantor, at the date 22 days before her mother died, and the notary's seal and the county recorder's stamp that said this was done correctly, completely, in full accordance with the law. She held it with both hands. She said nothing for a long time. When she finally spoke, it was very quietly, in the way of someone saying something to a person who is not in the room but is present in it nonetheless. She said, "Thank you, me." The conference room was still around her. The screen was dark. The deed was in her hands. Constance had done what she came to do. The investigators arrived at Gregory's office on a Tuesday morning. Two of them, the kind of visit that does not announce itself in advance, that comes with the particular authority of people who have already reviewed the relevant documents and are now conducting the portion of their work that requires a face in a room rather than a file on a desk. They identified themselves to the receptionist with the professional brevity of people who do not need to explain themselves at length because the nature of their visit is self-explaining. They were from the financial crimes unit of the state attorney's office. They were there about the trust accounts. The case had been building since the morning after the will reading. Morrison had filed the complaint the same day he transmitted the video to the state attorney, the specific documented complaint of an attorney acting on behalf of a deceased client's estate, supported by the accounting ledger. Constance had annotated the video recording she had made, and the chain of transfers she had identified and read aloud on camera with the precision of someone who had spent a week studying the numbers and was prepared to explain each one. The ledger had been received by the financial crimes unit with the particular attention that evidence receives when it has already done most of the investigator's work. The yellow sticky notes Constance had placed on the relevant pages, each one marking a transfer, each one noting the date and amount in her handwriting, were the kind of annotation that made an investigator's job not easier, but simpler, which was a different thing. Easier meant less effort. Simpler meant clearer. The lead investigator, a woman of about 50 named Reese, who had been working financial elder abuse cases for 12 years, looked at the ledger on her desk and said to her partner, "This woman from a hospital bed assembled more useful evidence than most of our field teams produce in a year." She had said it with the specific quality of professional respect that is not performed but earned the recognition of a colleague's work, even when the colleague was not a colleague in any formal sense, but simply a 70-year-old woman who had understood with the clarity that sometimes comes at the end of things exactly what needed to be done, and had done it with the tools available to her. Gregory's attorney called Morrison the day after the investigators visited. The call was brief and had the quality of a professional communication whose subtext was considerably larger than its text. The attorney mentioned that his client was prepared to cooperate with the investigation. He mentioned that his client recognized the seriousness of the situation. He mentioned carefully whether there was any possibility that certain aspects of the proceeding might be, he chose his word with visible care, resolved without the full criminal process. Morrison said he was not in a position to speak to the state's proceeding, which was outside his authority. He said it the way he said things that were true and required no elaboration. The attorney thanked him and ended the call. Diana retained her own attorney on Wednesday. This was the specific kind of information that traveled through the channels by which these things traveled, not announced, not formally communicated, but known in the way that the dissolution of an alliance is always known before it is stated. She had hired someone whose practice was separate from Gregory's, whose interests were specifically her own, and whose first communication to Gregory's attorney was apparently a letter establishing that Diana had not been aware of the trust account manipulations and had no liability for them. The partnership of their ambition, which had organized itself around a plan that had now failed completely, was in the process of reassigning the weight of its failure. Constance had known somewhere in the clarity of her final weeks that this would happen. She had known that the architecture of what Gregory and Diana had built together was the architecture of shared interest rather than shared principle, and that shared interest dissolves when the interest is no longer shared. She had understood Gregory and Diana the way Edmund had taught her to understand things, by looking at them clearly, without the distortion of hoping they were different from what they were. Gregory called Lily on a Thursday evening. She was at the lake house. She had been there since the week after the will reading, not as a resident yet, but as a person familiarizing herself with an inheritance, walking the rooms, and the shoreline, sitting in the chair by the window where Constance had told her Edmund used to sit in the early mornings. The phone rang and she looked at the name and answered. Gregory's voice had changed. The confidence was gone, not replaced by remorse, not replaced by anything that suggested genuine reckoning, but simply absent the way confidence is absent when the structure that supported it has been removed. What remained was a register she had not heard from him, before the register of a man who needs something and has run out of other approaches to getting it. He said, "Lily, I think we need to talk." What's happening, the investigation, all of it, I don't think that's what Constance would have wanted. She wasn't a vindictive person. We both know that. If you could speak to Morrison, to the attorneys, maybe there's a way to... Lily said Constance made her decision. He said, "We're family. What happened between us doesn't have to." She said she made her decision clearly and in full knowledge of what she was doing. "I'm not going to reverse it." She ended the call. She stood at the window for a moment. Outside, the lake held its evening light in the way it held all light steadily, without preference, the same water in the same evening that it had been in every other evening for as long as anyone had been looking at it. The light that Edmund had shown Constance. The light Constance had looked at on the afternoon she signed the deed. The light that would be there tomorrow and the day after that, available to whoever was present to see it. She put the phone in her pocket. She went out to the porch. The air was cold in the particular way of autumn evenings at the lake, clear and specific, carrying the smell of the water and the fallen leaves and the quality of a season that has decided to be honest about itself. She stood on the porch and looked at the water. She did not feel triumph. She felt something quieter and more durable, the feeling of a thing correctly completed, of a property returned to the person it was meant for, of a woman who had spent her last 3 weeks of life doing what she had the strength and clarity to do and had done it completely. She thought Constance knew Gregory would make that call. She thought Constance prepared for it anyway. The detective had said it plainly, reading through the ledger with its yellow sticky notes and its annotated margins. "I have not seen anything like this." From a hospital bed. Constance had not been in a hospital bed when she understood what mattered. She had been in the bed she had shared with Edmund at the window she had looked out of for 22 years with the lake in front of her, and the full use of a mind that had decided in the last weeks available to it to use itself completely. The greedy always leave traces, Edmund had told her once. You just need someone patient enough to look. She had been patient enough. She had looked. She had left Lily everything she needed. The water was still. The porch was quiet. Lily stood in the last of the evening light and felt in the way she had been feeling it since the will, reading her mother beside her, not as memory, not as imagination, but as the specific quality of presence that belongs to people who have done their work completely and are resting in the knowledge of it. She said quietly to the lake, to the evening, to whatever Constance had become, "You did everything me. You did all of it." The water held its stillness. The light was going. The lake house was hers. Lily did not enter the lake house as an owner. Not the first time. The deed said she was one now. Morrison had explained that clearly in the careful language of attorneys and filed documents and completed transfers. The inter vivos gift deed had been signed, witness notarized, and recorded before Constance died. The lake house was no longer part of Edmund's estate. It did not belong to Gregory. It did not belong to the fight he had spent 18 months preparing. It belonged to Lily. But knowing a thing legally and feeling it in your body were not the same. So when she stood at the old wooden door with the brass key in her hand, she did not feel like someone claiming property. She felt like a daughter being allowed into a room where the people she loved had been waiting for her. The key turned with a soft resistance. The door opened inward, and everything was still there. Not untouched exactly. Time had touched everything. The air carried the faint scent of closed wood lake, damp and dust. The curtains had faded slightly at the edges. The woven rug near the sitting room had lost some of its color where the afternoon sun reached it. But the shape of the place remained exactly as Lily remembered from the last summer Edmund was alive. The blue armchair by the window, the small table beside it, the framed sketch of the shoreline above the mantel, the old quilt folded over the back of the sofa, the brass lamp Edmund had always tapped twice before turning on as if asking it politely to wake up. Lily stood in the doorway and did not move. She could almost hear him. Not in a frightening way, not as a voice from another room, more as a habit of memory. Edmund laughing softly from the porch, Constance calling from the kitchen. The two of them moving through this house with the ease of people who had learned how to be quiet together without being lonely. Lily stepped inside and closed the door behind her. On the table by the window where Edmund used to leave his reading glasses, there was a small envelope. Cream-colored. Her name written across the front in Constance's handwriting. Lily. She knew immediately that Morrison had arranged it. He had said only one thing after handing her the keys. Your mother asked me to make sure the house was ready before you came. At the time, Lily had thought he meant locks, utilities, legal paperwork. Now she understood he had meant this. She sat in the blue armchair because it was the closest place to sit. Her hands were not steady when she opened the envelope. Inside was a letter. Only 3 pages. Constance's handwriting had grown thinner near the end, but not careless. Every word was placed with intention. Lily began to read. My dearest Lily, if you are reading this inside the lake house, then Morrison has done what I asked, and the deed has done what it was meant to do. First, I need you to understand something before anyone else tells you a version that makes me smaller or angrier than I was. I did not sign that deed to punish Gregory. Lily stopped reading. Outside the window, the lake moved in small silver folds under the afternoon light. She looked back down. Constance continued. I know that is what he will say. He will say I was bitter. He will say I was influenced. He will say I was trying to take something from him. None of that is true. I signed it because Edmund wanted you to have this place. He told me that more than once. The first time was on the porch 10 years ago. You had just driven away after spending the weekend here. Edmund stood at the railing for a long time after your car disappeared through the trees. Then he said, that child breathes easier here. Lily's vision blurred. She remembered that weekend. She had arrived, tired, overworked, newly divorced, pretending badly that she was fine. Edmund had not asked too many questions. Constance had made soup. They had let her sleep late. On Sunday morning, Edmund had handed her coffee on the porch and said the lake was best before anyone tried to explain it. She had not known he remembered. She kept reading. He said if we are not here one day, this house should remember us for her. Make sure it belongs to the right person, Connie. I told him he should put it in writing. He said he would. Then he got tired. Then he got sick. Then there were doctors and appointments and days when the smallest task became large. He did not forget Lily. He simply ran out of time. Lily pressed the letter against her chest for a moment. She did not cry loudly. Grief had changed shape too many times in the last month to arrive as one dramatic collapse. It came now as pressure behind the eyes, as a tightening in the throat, as the sudden understanding that love had been moving quietly around her for years without asking to be noticed. On the second page, Constance's words continued. I am not a hero. I am only a woman who loved Edmund enough to finish the promise he did not live long enough to complete. This house is not a prize. It is not revenge. It is a place where you were seen. I want you to have a place in this world where no one can tell you that you do not belong. Lily lowered the letter and looked around the room. The blue chair, the brass lamp. The shoreline sketch, the table, the light. This was not just inheritance. This was recognition. She placed the letter carefully on the table and opened the drawer beneath it, not because she was looking for anything, but because something about the room seemed to invite her hand there. Inside was a pressed rose, dry, flattened between two pieces of old wax paper. Beside it lay a small folded note, Edmund's handwriting. Lily knew it immediately from birthday cards, from labels on books he had mailed her, from the way he always wrote her name with care. She unfolded it. The note was dated 10 years earlier. The ink had faded slightly, but the sentence was clear. "This place is Lily's. C knows what to do." For a moment, the whole room seemed to become very still, not empty, full. Constance's deed had not been an act of desperation in her final weeks. It had been the completion of a decision she and Edmund had carried together for years. Lily picked up the pressed rose. She remembered the garden outside, the small row of roses Constance had tended near the porch, because Edmund liked the way they looked against the lake at dusk. She remembered Constance cutting one once and placing it in a glass beside Lily's bed when Lily had been too sad to get up for breakfast. A small thing, a quiet thing, the kind of thing Constance had always done. Lily read the final page of the letter. "Gregory may never understand this. That is not your burden. He will think in terms of loss because that is how he has always measured love, as something that can be taken, counted, divided, or withheld. But Edmund did not love that way. And neither do I. I do not have many things to leave you. Not the kind of things people fight over in court. But I could do this. I could make sure that the place Edmund wanted you to have became yours before anyone could take it from you. So if you ever wonder why I signed that paper, remember this. I was not taking from Gregory. I was keeping faith with Edmund. And with you." The last line was written more slowly than the rest. "Mother does not have much left to give you. But I can do what Edmund did not have time to do. And that is enough." Lily sat with the letter in her lap until the room changed color around her. The afternoon light softened. The lake turned pale gold. The windows reflected the sky back at itself. Somewhere outside, a bird moved through the reeds near the shore. She understood then what Constance had truly given her. Not only the house, not only the deed, not only protection from Gregory. Constance had given her the truth of belonging. Gregory had called it property. Morrison had called it a transfer. The court would call it a valid deed. But sitting in Edmund's chair with Constance's letter in her hands and the pressed rose on the table beside her, Lily understood that the lake house had always been something else. A promise. Made on a porch. Remembered through illness. Completed at the edge of death. She stood and walked to the window. Outside, the lake held the same light Edmund had once shown Constance, the same light Constance had watched when she signed the deed, the same light that would be there tomorrow and the day after that. Lily touched the glass with her fingertips. "Thank you," she whispered. Not to the house, not only to Constance, to both of them. Behind her on the table, the pressed rose rested beside Edmund's note and Constance's final letter. 3 pieces of proof. The deed showed what had been done. The note showed how long it had been intended. And the letter showed why. Lily looked once more at the lake and finally understood. Constance had not made a final decision. She had finished an old one. By spring, the lake house no longer felt like a place waiting for permission to be lived in. Lily opened the windows on the first warm morning of April and let the air move through every room. It came in carrying the clean scent of water, pine damp earth, and the first roses beginning to open along the garden path. The curtains lifted slightly from the walls. The old boards gave their soft, seasonal creak beneath her feet. Somewhere outside, a bird called from the trees near the dock, and the sound crossed the water and came back thinner, gentler, as if the lake had decided to return only what was useful. For a long time, Lily stood at the window and looked out. The lake was flat that morning, almost mirror still, the kind of stillness that made every reflection seem deliberate. The trees along the shore, the pale sky, the dock Edmund had repaired every summer until his knees made ladders difficult. The small wooden bench Constance had insisted belonged near the roses, because every garden needed one place where a person could sit without being asked what they were doing. Lily had been asked more than once what she planned to do with the house. Gregory's attorney had asked it in a tone that suggested selling would be practical. A real estate agent had left 2 messages calling the property rare and underutilized. A vacation rental company had sent a letter full of projections. Even Morrison carefully and without pressure had told her that the lake house would command a strong price if she ever wished to liquidate. Lily had listened. She had thanked them, and she had made her decision. She would not sell it. She would not rent it out to strangers. She would not turn it into a profit center, a retreat package, a seasonal asset, or any of the other names people used when they wanted a place to stop being a place and become a number. The lake house had been left to her for a reason, and she had begun to understand that inheritance was not always about receiving. Sometimes it was about continuing. That first spring, Lily called 3 women from Constance's old church circle, then 5 more from the local women's association, then 2 widows Morrison quietly suggested might appreciate an afternoon away from rooms that had grown too silent. By May, the back porch held folding chairs every Thursday.
Not many.
Never crowded. A dozen women at most, sometimes fewer, sitting with plates of sandwiches and fruit cups of iced tea, sweating in the warmth shoes, off beneath chairs, cardigans folded over railings, voices soft at first and then easier as the afternoon opened. Some had known Constance. Some had only known of her. Some came because they were lonely and did not yet know how to say that. Some came because they had spent years caring for husbands, parents, children, grandchildren, and had forgotten what it felt like to sit by water with no one needing anything from them for 1 hour. Lily did not make speeches. She did not explain the deed. She did not tell the story of Gregory unless someone asked. She simply opened the door. That she realized was what Constance had done for her. There were afternoons when Lily could almost see them as they must have been. Edmund standing near the dock, one hand on the old railing looking across the lake with that quiet expression Lily remembered from the rare people who do not need to own beauty in order to love it. Constance beside him, thinner near the end, but still precise in everything she touched, still noticing when a glass needed filling, when a guest needed a chair, moved into the shade, when someone was pretending not to be tired. Lily thought often of the memory Constance had left her in the letter. Edmund on the porch watching Lily's car disappear through the trees, saying that she breathed easier here. At first, Lily had thought that sentence was only about her. By spring, she understood it differently. The lake house made many women breathe easier. Maybe that was what Edmund had seen first. Maybe that was what Constance had finished. One Thursday evening, after the last guest had gone and the porch had been cleared, Lily walked down to the garden. The first roses had fully opened. They were pale pink with deeper edges, the old variety Constance had planted because they survived cold, better than they looked like they should. Lily cut one carefully and carried it inside. On the small table by the window, the same table where she had found Constance's final letter, she had placed 3 things. The framed deed, a photograph of Edmund and Constance on the porch, taken years before the illness, both of them turned slightly toward each other, as if the photographer had only interrupted something already in motion, and the white pearl-handled pen. Morrison had given it to her after the final hearing. Constance had used it to sign the deed, the last important signature of her life. Lily had held it then and felt its small, impossible weight. A pen was not a large object. It did not look powerful. It did not announce itself. It was not made of gold or locked in a vault or protected by armed men. But in Constance's hand, it had done what lawyers' accounts family history and Gregory's 18 months of planning could not undo. It had completed a promise. Lily had brought a small glass display frame from town that morning. She lined it with cream linen and placed the pen inside carefully. The pearl handle caught the light, not brightly, softly. The way some things glow only when you are paying attention. She mounted the frame beside the door, just below the framed deed, and beside the photograph of Edmund and Constance. For a while she stood there without moving. The deed showed what Constance had done. The photograph showed who she had loved. The pen showed how quietly a life can change when the right hand refuses to tremble. Lily touched the edge of the frame. Then she whispered Mother signed one paper. But what she really left behind no paper could ever hold. Outside, the evening settled over the lake. The water turned gold, then copper, then the soft blue-gray that came just before dark. Lily stood at the glass doors and watched the dock disappear slowly into shadow. She imagined Edmund and Constance in the little rowboat he used to keep tied at the end of the dock. Late afternoon, oars moving without hurry. Constance with a scarf around her hair because lake wind never respected careful styling. Edmund pretending not to notice when she corrected his rowing. Both of them laughing quietly, the sound low and private, and carried back toward the porch in pieces. Love did not vanish, Lily thought. Not if people had built it into the right things. It moved differently after death. It passed into keys, letters, porch chairs, recipes, gardens, deeds, windows left open in spring. It traveled through the people who remained, through the hands that unlocked doors, through the rooms that welcomed someone else, through a daughter who finally understood that she had not been given property. She had been given trust. Near the roses, the wind moved gently. A single petal loosened from one of the open blooms and drifted down past the porch rail, across the path, and onto the surface of the lake. It touched the water without sound. The circle it made was small, then wider, then gone. The house was quiet, but not empty. That was the difference Lily understood now. A house could be silent and full of life at the same time if the right people had loved it properly before they left. She turned from the window and looked once more at the framed pen. The pearl handle held the last of the evening light. It seemed almost to shine from within. Lily thought of Constance in bed by the window. The lake outside, the full use of her mind turned toward the one thing she still had time to finish. She thought of Edmund's note. This place is Lily's. C knows what to do. And she thought of Constance's final line. Mother does not have much left to give you, but I can do what Edmund did not have time to do, and that is enough. Lily smiled then, a small smile. The kind that comes after grief has not left exactly, but has learned where to sit. The lake house knew who it belonged to, not because the deed said so, though it did, not because the court confirmed it, though it had, but because Constance had understood something Gregory never had. The real inheritance was not the house. It was the love that made the house worth protecting. And every spring after that, when the roses bloomed and the lake went still in the evening light, Lily opened the doors, set out the chairs, and let the house do what Edmund and Constance had always meant it to do. Remember, welcome! If Constance's story moved, you leave one word in the comments to describe her. And if you want to hear more stories about quiet women's strong hearts and the justice that comes when truth finally has its moment, subscribe. This channel was made for you.